Hello, everyone. I'm glad that you're here for our workshop on prompt engineering. And we're going to dive right into talking about prompt engineering along with Dr. Shara Bell, Dr. Abhi Vigilante, and Umang Chowdhury. In our last workshop, we ended talking about transformer models that had first been trained on text, a large corpus of text. Then we had instruction fine-tuning of this model, and so it understood when a task was being requested. So it understand when a task was being requested and how to do the task. Then there was reinforcement learning with human feedback, which trained the model in how to respond preferentially. So in a helpful manner, a way that is not harmful, that continued the conversation. So turn this large language model, which is useful, but turned it into a chatbot, which is even more useful. Then we talked about augmenting that model with tools, because we realized that the model itself didn't have access to the internet, and that any representation that it had of what it had learned on the internet was fuzzy. So some things would be clear, but other things just were not clear at all. And the mental model that we have is a JPEG of the internet. Some parts clear enough, other parts just plain fuzzy. But with tools and with training on the tools, the model is able to recognize when it needs to go out to go and get additional information, or there may be an explicit call. So it can do a lookup on the internet, or it can get to a calculator, or it can go to Wolfram Alpha, which has many different capabilities, or with custom plugins, maybe it goes to a set of papers that you have that you've vetted for particular use, or a tool that you've developed in your lab that you know is going to be giving you correct information to augment the information which is coming out of the model. So again, just to remind you, so the prompt goes in, it may realize it needs to make a call, it'll take that information and put it right back here into the prompt. So it's feeding itself in with the information. So then the last thing that we're left with is prompt engineering, because you've got to converse with the model, you've got to chat with the model, you've got to prompt it, and so it can do these things. And it turns out this is one of the most critical pieces. You might remember that we talked about Bing GPT and the fact that they probably didn't do as much reinforcement learning from human feedback. So what did they do? They came up with a long prompt, which actually described how the model should act. And they did that purely in a prompt. So a prompt can do a great deal to change the behavior of a model, to change how it's responding to, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Prompt engineering, the different ways of prompting, and how you can get the model to do what you need it to do. A few weeks ago, I co-authored a paper with Jules White, Doug Schmidt, graduate students who did amazing work. I did this much on the paper. They had this in mind, and it was terrific. And the idea was that rather than thinking about these prompts as just being, one prompt after another, like a whole stack of prompts, instead think of them almost like you're programming the deep learning network, like you're programming the chatbot. And if you think along the lines of you are programming the chatbot in some way, asking it to do things, having it do things for you, then what comes to mind that a reasonable way to think about all this is to think about design patterns. So in programming, you can just program, absolutely, but you can also think in terms of design patterns. And so this is the way you solve certain problems. So the paper is a prompt pattern catalog. And here's the prompt pattern. The idea is that you have different patterns, categories of patterns for ways of interacting with chatbots. One is input semantics, customization, output customization, error identification, prompt improvement, interaction, and context control. So these are all ways of, high-level ways of thinking about how you interact with the model. Here's a link to the paper just so you can have it and get access to it. What I'm going to do for this first part, before I turn this over to Abhi to talk about her example of applications of these this prompt engineering in research, is I'm going to go through some of these. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to describe what they are, and then I'm going to give you some solid examples. So let's start with input semantics. And the idea here is you're changing how the model is creating is working. So in this case, the particular prompt pattern, meta language creation, defines a new symbology for the model. So in this case, if I want to be doing some work and I want to have some help with a graph problem, rather than explaining in English all the time that I have a graph dependency, instead I can say, I'm going to define a new symbol. So from now on, whenever I type two identifiers separated by an arrow, I'm describing a graph, for example. Describe the graph. Now, with that single arrow, I encapsulate a lot of information. This makes the prompt much, much smaller, because now I can do very complex graph dependencies by simply using that arrow, and the model has no problem with that. That kind of in-context definition for these large language models is not a problem, and it allows you to be much more precise, much clearer and shorter, and the model performs better rather than having lots of vague description. So that is meta language creation. Questions about meta language creation? All right. Then let's talk about output automator. So the idea here is you're changing how the model produces what it's doing. So one thing that happens is that it might generate a lot of code for you if you're asking it to do things. So one thing that you can do is you can say, hey, whenever you have code that's more than one file, generate a script that will generate everything that I need. So instead of giving me all the information, generate a script. So this is a way to automate the output from the model. So rather than giving you the raw information, it might actually create a much more concise way of generating it. And Jackie had a question, can you do that right now with ChatGPT? Absolutely. All of these were actually first done on ChatGPT. But now you can also do them on, any of the other ones. The trick is, with some models, it may not work as well. Will this work with Bard? I don't know. One of the things that we're going to be developing over the summer is a way to version these prompts, because really you want to keep track of the prompts that you've created, because this is your new source code, right? So you want to be able to version it, but that means you also need to keep track of which model you use. This is on ChatGPT, GPT-4, Bard, Claude. You want to say which version of the model you had. So you want the prompt, the model you used it with, the version of the model that you did it with, and then its output. So those are all things you want to track. So yes, you can use this with all the models. Pretty much any model which has been trained with reinforcement learning from human feedback is based on a large language model. Something along these lines will work. This particular writing or wording may or may not work as well for Bard as for ChatGPT or GPT-4, but the idea of an output automator is there. Great. So let's go and take a look at the next one, persona. This is actually a really powerful one. These models have been trained on massive amounts of information, so they know lots of different writing styles. How many people here know Jeremy Howard? How many people here have used fast.ai? Shara, I know you have, and Umang, and Abby. Anybody else know fast.ai? Amazing course, an amazing instructor that started to introduce deep learning, and actually was one of the very first people to do transfer learning with text models. So he's one of the reasons why we are where we are right now. But he's great at explaining things, very down to earth, very straightforward way to describe things. So one way that works really well is you can say, hey, provide all your explanations in the style of Jeremy Howard. And all of a sudden, it's readable, it's approachable, it's understandable. You could also do, say, act as an expert in reading comprehension for young readers. So you can ask for expertise as well. So you ask it to take on the persona of how to speak or how to think. Another good example is act as a security expert You are a security expert. Review my code for security vulnerabilities. The model can take on lots of different personas, right? I mean, and if you don't do anything, it's just like an average. But if you say, I want the security expert, then now all of a sudden the experience of a security expert is right front and center. And when you give some code, it's not going to pay attention to the fact that it's ugly code. It's going to say, you're vulnerable here. The persona allows you to focus the entire model, and so it acts in a particular way. Let's quickly go through some other ones. Visualization generator. It can't create images, but it can absolutely create prompts to create images in Dall-E or stable diffusion. So it can do that for you. Or, you can ask it to generate ggplot code. Absolutely. I would like to have a visualization. Here's my data. Give me a visualization that represents these and give it to me in ggplot2. Not a problem. All right, recipe. All right, you can ask it to explain things to you and to tell you things in order for how you're supposed to do them. I need to deploy an application to the cloud. Great. Here's the context for it. Now give it to me as a recipe, meaning please identify any, give me all the steps, fill in any missing steps, identify any unnecessary steps. So turning tasks into recipes. Another one, template. This gives you a template for how that output ought to be. One way of storing all the information that you have in a chat is to say, hey, wrap up this entire chat in a JSON format. This is especially helpful if you're using this in a classroom and you want your students to explore using the chat, but then you want to see what they've done. Ask the model to wrap it up all as JSON and have them email it to you or submit it to you. It's a great way to encapsulate everything that's happened. Any questions so far about input semantics or custom or output customization? All right. Let's go through a few more then. Also with template, you could say, create this table for me, give it to me in CSV. Fact checklist, there's a big concern around facts. One thing that you can do is you can ask the model itself to generate the list of facts that it was using to come up with a particular solution or argument. And then that gives you the list of facts to check. You can do reflection, and this also another type of this is a chain of thought reasoning. So you ask it to actually go through. This allows it to do a couple of things. One, it can describe to you how it got there. Two, this actually allows the model to solve much more complex problems. If you ask it to describe its steps and describe the reasoning, then all of a sudden it can do far more complex reasoning than it can if you just ask it for the final output. Not unlike us, right? If we describe how we're solving a problem as we're doing it, then all of a sudden we can do much more complex things. Show your work. Question refinement. Sometimes our prompts are kind of long and unwieldy and we have to iterate a few times. You can ask the model, reset my prompt or prompts above in a way that's clearer and allows you to provide a clearer answer. Boom, all of a sudden you have a much shorter prompt. And if you want to, you can restart at that point and say restart, which is a context manager prompt, restart chat and start with just that small prompt. Now you've taken all this prompting, reduced it down to something which is even better and shorter, and continue on your way. Another one, flipped interaction. This is ask the model to ask you for information until it has enough information to do what it needs to do. So I would like to have a lesson plan that talks about transformers, introductory lesson plan, and I have 50 minutes. Ask me questions about the lesson until you have enough information to give me an outline. And it will say, great, are these undergraduate students or graduate students? Have they previously had a class in transformers? Do they have a background in deep learning? Ask questions until it has enough, and then it will generate the list for you. The model knows a great deal about a great many different things, but this is corralling what you need. You can't yourself maybe put everything in there that you need, but you can ask the model to help you decide what needs to go in there. Yes, Dr. Ya.
I thought it was interesting where you mentioned in 15 minutes, and I just haven't had a chance to test this yet, so I'm interested. Do they have a concept of time? Like if you said, make this, because I understand you can say make it shorter, make it small, longer, make it more detailed, but I've never tried to test with time before, so you got me interested in that.
Yeah, if you think about it, I mean, there are lots of lesson plans, and lots of the lesson plans have timing information. So yes, it has a good idea of the information content that is associated with time. Does it really understand time? Well, it understands or represents, let me be careful, represents causality, represents time, and can do math on those things. So it's there. If you get too far outside, it may not be able to do, what you want. I want to do this in 60 seconds. All right.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Final one that I'll do, I'm going to pass this over to Abby. Gameplay. So this is actually a really fun one. So this is an example from Jules. Almost all of these examples are from Jules White. And this one is pretty amazing. He wanted to play a security game, and the model created a virtual prompt for him, and actually was terrific at this. So thinking up a good game, and then taking turns with the model is actually a really engaging way to work with the models. All right, let me go ahead and stop here. Any questions before we move on? Any questions about prompt patterns broadly defined?
Yes, I have a question. So how do you know which words to choose to give you the maximum amount of information?
And that's where, so that you know where to start. If you have no idea where to start, the place to start is looking at the prompt patterns to see if there's something which is close to what you might need. Then you word it as, it's going to be messy, right? It's not going to be great. You word it, you get some information back. Then you can ask the model. You can actually ask for question refinement. Restate my prompt above in a way that is clearer and provides necessary information for you to provide a complete response. So you do it this messy way. You might have to iterate once, but then the model, the model understands sort of what you're asking. Now you can say, take all the previous, turn it into a short, concise prompt that is better.
Thank you.
It's all iteration. So think in terms of iteration. It's not going to be perfect at first, but you iterate through it. Fantastic. Other questions? I found in ChatGPT that after a few prompts back and forth, the model appears to forget the initial input. Great. So Jack, what's happening here is that the model is, so your model context length is only about this long, right? So let's say I've added a few things, and then I shift down. Well, now what's happened to this stuff up here? Well, it goes away. If it's not in the prompt, the model is not aware of it. So that's where that question refinement might really come in handy. Refine this, and so it's much shorter, and then you restart. And you start with that shorter prompt, and then it gives you more space. GPT-4 has context length that is 5 to 6 times longer than ChatGPT. So GPT-4 has much longer context. Dr. Ya.
So I don't know if this is a silly question or not, but I saw it posted and I wanted to ask about it. If you're trying to be parsimonious with your tokens and your prompts and just use as few characters as possible, I saw someone post that you could translate it first to Chinese because that's more concise before you post it, and that would use less tokens. And I wasn't sure if that was to be taken seriously or not.
It depends on the model and depends on the tokenization as to whether or not that'd be more concise. Much like programming computers, back in the day we had 4K. That's kind of where we are with ChatGPT, right? But now you have GPT-4, which can have a context length of 32K. So now it gets less important. But this is where that question refinement comes in, I think. This is also where tools come in. So maybe your prompt does not have to be nearly as long if you can simply say, and use this, right? So that can really shorten what it is. But that is where the meta language creation comes in. that is where the tools come in and the question refinement. All those together will make it much shorter. Great.
Thank you.
And yeah, copy and pasting is great. All right, let me go and pass this over to Abby then. Abby, I'm going to stop my share so you can share if you'd like to.
Okay, can everyone see the screen and also hear me? Cool. Okay, yeah, so I am going to be talking through just a few examples kind of within this research pipeline that I found where ChatGPT really, I think, performed quite well, where I've had to sort of have a bit of a conversation with ChatGPT and kind of like get it into some certain directions. So just some really useful sort of general purpose ways that you might be able to utilize ChatGPT to sort of help you in this pipeline. And so I've just pulled up an image because to kind of keep in the back of your mind about sort of, the research life cycle, where we typically think about kind of, coming up with a problem, doing some search around exactly how we want to tackle that problem, doing the actual research, which is a little bit kind of going to be left out of this because I think that is highly specific, but I think we would love to hear people's ideas about how to use ChatGPT for their specific research, doing their specific research, like the active research part in the little clinic after this part. And I think also Charo might have in her programming examples some cool suggestions for how you could actually perform research with ChatGPT. But then after that, you have to kind of turn your results into a paper, and then maybe you also give a talk about your paper. And ChatGPT can actually really just help with kind of all of these steps in some really neat ways. So I have a lot of examples. I don't know if we will have time to get through all of them, but I will try, of kind of me exploring, trying to get ChatGPT to sort of help me with various stages of this research life cycle.
A quick question, could you make that larger?
Yes.
To Control Plus. And if you don't get through all the examples, then I'll invite people to join us in the hour session after if you'd like to get more detail on these.
That's true. Yeah, is this a good size? Okay. Yeah, so okay, a bit of disclaimer. My PhD was in astrophysics. I have used my own papers to sort of in places where I've given it papers. So there is going to be a lot of talking about astrophysics in here. You don't need to know anything about astrophysics, but that is why that's what all of this discussion revolves around for a lot of these discussions that I had with ChatGPT. So a first place that I decided to start was an example that actually Jesse had talked about a few days ago, which was this idea of maybe you have, a description of your research interests and you want ChatGPT, maybe it'll help, turn that research interest paragraph into something for a different audience, or maybe you can use a description of your research to kind of help guide what other areas you should focus on. So I gave it a really short paragraph, basically saying like, this is research that I'm working on. But I was asking it, can you suggest to me what edits to make to this paragraph for it to be accessible to a more general audience? So I'm saying, assume that I wrote this paragraph to be accessible to astronomers. Can you rewrite this paragraph so that maybe other researchers who aren't necessarily astronomers can also understand this? And it did a pretty good job. I think it copied a lot of the same sort of text. And that being said, I don't think that this was too far off originally from being accessible to the general audience. But I think one thing that was interesting was that then I asked it if it could rewrite that paragraph, but make it accessible to a more general audience. So maybe imagine a high school student or someone in the general public. Then how would you kind of reword some of these things to make sense for them? And I think it did a few interesting things, like talked about, replace machine learning with calling it computer algorithms and then specifying that that's called machine learning. It puts this line here as like, imagine the universe as a giant cosmic puzzle. So it's trying to like create analogies that it thinks might be more helpful for that specific audience. And so in general, this paragraph is, I think, very much more accessible to the general public, but it still does kind of encompass things that I've mentioned that I work on. Then I tried to ask it this question, which is, if I wanted to branch out, what other fields do you think that I should look into to broaden my research expertise? And it gave a lot of suggestions. This kind of just covered a lot of the area of astronomy, but it did do a pretty good job, I think, of observing pretty drastically different sort of categories of astronomy. So I would say that like there's not a lot of redundancy across these 7 categories that it suggested. And so then I tried to test out. So let's say that I decided to add number 3 and 6 from your suggestion list into my research. Then what might my research description look like? And it rewrites my original research description, but now it incorporates what I might describe if I had also done work about gravitational lensing and the other topic that it suggested. And then I also was able to rewrite that for a non-astronomer audience. So I'm kind of able to poke around and see, like, maybe I do want to do this, study these other things, and then kind of get a little glimpse into kind of what my research blurb might look like if I were to do those things, and see kind of if I like the sound of that and if I think that that sounds like my research is more complete, which, might seem like something that you could come up with on your own, what other things to study, but it is cool to see it kind of put it all together for you and kind of figure out, like, where might I want to like investigate next. So the next chat that I tried was that I wanted to get it to give me like real concrete ideas. So not just name for me other fields in astronomy, but like give me real research projects that I could work on. So I told it a few specific things that I currently research, and then asked for research projects that relate to that topic. So these are much more kind of zeroed in on existing within the context of the current work that I mentioned that I do, rather than asking how to branch out. So they are much more specific. And then again, I've kind of targeted one of the things. So I said the 4th suggestion is interesting, and then asked for specifically how it imagines that I use machine learning, because I asked for projects where I want to be using machine learning for astronomy. So I asked it specifically what it thinks machine learning might be able to help with. And then these answers were a little bit general. So I then asked it about, I told it what methodologies I wanted to use, because it seemed to not really be focusing on methodology too much. So I said, I really want to use large models, transformer models. Then what do you suggest I could work on specifically in that context? And again, I was actually surprised by this answer that both of the suggestions that it gave me were actually quite decent, for like pretty good candidates for using specifically like transformers or much larger models on. So it actually was pretty good at getting me to a point where, like, if I wanted to use transformers and I didn't really know what to do with that research, it actually gave me 2 pretty good suggestions. And then this part, this last question was just kind of for fun. I said, if I have a graduate student who wants to work on this, which one of these do you think I can give to the graduate student? Which one do you think is more accessible for a graduate student? And it gave good reasoning about it. Said, like, I would give them this project. They can leverage their current understanding. It also uses cutting edge machine learning. It even gives the idea that, like, this work could require collaboration. It also could produce very valuable results, which could mean the student would get conference presentations. So it really kind of thought about everything that a graduate student might want in a project. So really had some strong reasoning behind suggesting that project, but then I also really like what it said at the end, which is very reasonable, which is, of course, you should also ask the student which one of these projects that they think is the most interesting, and not just give them one to work on, which I thought was great, that it even has that level of like compassion of, you know, suggesting to me that the obvious thing to do is just to suggest both of those to the student. Okay, so maybe now I have decided that I want to work on one of these two ideas. I've had a conversation with ChatGPT. I really love one of the ideas and I want to start working on it. I did want to see a little bit how good of a literature search that this could do for me. And I know that people have had issues with literature searches. I've had issues with literature searches where it makes up papers, or it will do a poor job of summarizing papers. So I maybe have just got lucky, but in this particular literature search, it did a good job. I did ask for a very specific set of paper. Like, I know that only like 20 papers exist on this topic. So maybe the set of papers that fall into this category was narrow enough, but it did suggest some good papers to me. And I then, out of the suggestions, because these actually were a little bit broad, I said this first paper, because it also provided, actually unprompted, it provided me a summary of all of these papers. I didn't even ask it to provide a summary. And then I said that the first paper seems like exactly what I want, and I asked for papers with methodology more similar to that one in particular. And then it listed to me a few papers, and it did a pretty good job again of really picking out that I wanted the methodology to be the same. So the methodology in that paper was using convolutional neural networks, and it did a good job of sort of hanging on to that and really picking for me papers in here, but that are only using deep learning convolutional neural networks to do that. So,
but only until 2021, right? I noticed no papers after.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, which actually was really interesting for this particular project, because back in 2021, actually not many people had done work on this. So maybe that also contributes to the set of papers it could have picked is like really narrow, because there weren't that many in 2021. There's a lot now that it doesn't know about. This was just a second literature search option where instead this time I gave it the full citation list of a paper, and I asked it, well, I first just gave it the list and I didn't ask a question, and it was like, that's a good list. And then I was like, wait, no, I have a question for you though about it. But I gave it the full list and I gave it the abstract of the paper, and I asked it if there's anything else that I should have cited in this paper, anything else that I like forgot about that seems relevant. And I only gave it the abstract, so obviously it's a little bit difficult for it, but it did give me a list of papers that it thinks might be relevant. It did do a good job. None of these were in the original citation list, so it didn't suggest to me anything that I already cited, but it did give me a little bit of a weird suggestion, which was a paper that was about warm dark matter models. And that's just not what that paper that the citation list was about. So then I asked it, why did you suggest the third paper if their focus is on warm dark matter models? Because I was curious, you know, if it could articulate where that came from. And it gave an okay answer. This answer to me was that it definitely doesn't really understand why that wouldn't be relevant, but it does just kind of say like, I just wanted to give you like a full list and see, you know, what you thought was worth citing, which, you know, is fair. In general, the suggestions weren't bad. Like I said, that one to me was a little bit weird, but it was cool. You know, some of these papers, even though they were from even like 2018, I don't think that I had heard about. So there were a couple here, and there are like real papers that were really interesting to see it bring up that I think were kind of maybe lesser known about. Like it wasn't just pulling out kind of necessarily the most obvious papers here to suggest to me. Okay.
And let's
So
do
then-
let's do a few more, and then
Okay, yes, I can try to go through a couple of these. I think that a few of these have interesting stuff and a few of them are like not that interesting. In this interaction, I was trying to get it to summarize and explain a paper to me, which it does a pretty decent job about. I think sort of the thing here was that I found that I had to give it the paper in smaller sections. So we talked about how this was GPT-4, and GPT-4 does have quite a big context that you can feed to it, but it's not necessarily an entire 20-page paper of context. So when you're trying to understand a paper, I actually found the most useful way to do this was to give it the paper in smaller sections. So I would give it the abstract and ask it to tell me what the paper is about. Then I gave it the list of the paper's main conclusions, and I asked it if it could summarize that specifically. Then I tried this, where I took a paragraph from the paper's summary and I asked if it could explain specifically what that paragraph means. And then I even tried, oh yeah, sorry, is there a question?
Yes. So if you would put in the link to the paper or the DOI number, would you be able, would the software then able to actually do the same thing, or do you actually need to copy in the text by itself?
so currently, GPT-4 does not have the plugins enabled. As soon as they're enabled, then yes, you'd be able to give it the link to the paper, and it may very well do a better job because they'll likely not just dump the entire paper in. It'd probably do a much better job than copying and pasting. But copying and pasting is sort of what we have right now, but they're moving very quickly. So it will not be long before you can just give it the link to the paper.
Thank you.
And I would notice that Abby is not like editing it to, taking out the bad line returns. None of that matters. Copy and dump is all you need to do.
Yeah.
And you have another question.
Oh, yes.
Hi. So have you checked the citations that it provided? Because I was struggling with this, and I just checked their citations that it suggested. The first author, I mean, none of the first authors it is suggesting is necessarily the author of the paper. And it is like the citation name is right, but it is from a different journal or with different writers, and the summary is kind of a merged summary from like kind of that field, not necessarily from the exact paper. So I struggle with this, and like I don't know what is the prompt engineering solution to solve that problem, because it is just at the moment it is not even correct.
Yeah, it definitely does have issues with that. And I have seen a lot of, suggestions that are just, like you said, they just aren't papers, or they're the paper, but the description is actually not what the paper is about. Like it just seems to have read the title and then written a summary, and the paper is not really about the summary, even though the summary sounds like it's what's the title's about. Like I said, I think the best way that I have found is only in asking for a very, very specific set of identifying a specific methodology, and or I think that I had tried and it worked decently well to say like with results that show this thing, but I don't really know. I don't know if Jesse has any suggestions.
So ChatGPT 3.5, and actually Paris was just mentioning this in the chat, does have some plugins now that are available. So really I would only do that kind of paper search once you have tried it out with plugins, where it actually has to be able, because otherwise it's going to be catch as catch can and only until June or September of 2021. But it's interesting that it got some of them. That just shows the power of learning the feed-forward network. But definitely, this is one to try after you have the plugins, and so you have much more certainty that it's actually finding something. Then I think we're going to have to iterate again on our prompt engineering to say, using only verifiable links from this source, do the following. So think of this as sort of like a possible initial first approach. And then you have another question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Dr. Yar.
Yes, hi. I noticed in one of your replies back, you had written like, great, exclamation point, and then your request. I'm curious whether those kind of pleasantries actually contribute to the conversation. I know it's just, I do that all the time also, just because it feels like such a natural dialogue, but whether those are, tokenized in their own way, and that's contributing to the system performing better somehow versus just like a factual exchange and being like, next thing is this, next thing is that.
Actually, yes, it does make a difference. As a matter of fact, the negative responses also make a difference. So that's one thing that we found with Bing GPT. If you went negative, and if the context was long enough, it went very negative. And this makes sense, right? So think about the internet. What tends to happen on the internet when you tell someone that they are wrong and you're even slightly rude about it? Right? Do they go, oh, I'm so sorry? No, they begin questioning your mother. No, it goes there immediately. And the models are trained on the internet. So even with that reinforcement learning from human feedback, it only is a guardrail. It will leap over that guardrail. So yes, by saying, yes, great, thank you, that's good, but then that means that tone of conversation is going to continue. Think of it as a mirror, If you go negative, it's going to go negative. Reinforcement learning will keep it from going too far unless it jumps the guardrails. So it actually does play a role.
Great, thank you.
And Abby, what would be the next sort of the best thing to sort of end on here, do you think? And then we'll go on to some of the examples in the hour that we have after this.
Yeah. So I think just at the end for this one, I really quick want to mention that so we've kind of discussed how ChatGPT likes to make up information. So in general, you don't want to like ask it just to receive information because it might give you something wrong. But after I'd given it at this point in this conversation a lot of the text of the paper, I did ask it a question, hoping that in the context of how much of this paper it had read, it would be able to answer it for me, because this question actually is specifically addressed in the text that I had already pasted, and it did give quite a good answer. So it is one way of extracting information specifically from a paper that you have now given it that information. It does quite a good job. And then maybe the last,
yeah, that'd be a great one.
Just really cool example is that I did have it write an outline of a paper for me. I told it I want to write this paper. Can you give me a detailed outline? And once it gave me the outline, I asked it if it could create a LaTeX template for me. And I told it I'm going to submit it to this particular journal. And I asked if it could create the LaTeX template following the journal's formatting standards. So it wrote me the code for the LaTeX, and I went ahead and pasted it into Overleaf, and this actually, it looks great. It renders, and this is exactly what this journal's LaTeX format tends to look like. So that was a cool use of not having to like write your own LaTeX, which is such a pain, and it'll just do it for you. And it looked great, and it knew to take the particular journal's like type of document and all that stuff. So it's exactly as it should be, which is a cool use.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Abby. And again, if you're interested in it, yeah, I know, Adam, right? I know the same thing with me. It's kind of like, if I've not been writing LaTeX for a while, I'm like, oh my God, no, I have to. Yeah, absolutely. So if you have more questions about this or would like to dive into more of those, remember that at 2:30, we're going to have the open hour. So you can go more. Dr. Bell, would you mind talking a little bit about the programming that you did and sort of what you found with that?
So I would love to talk about this programming. So I was thinking so one thing I'm particularly interested in is the extent to which these models can be helpful for people who are conducting research in areas that maybe that people don't do so much coding currently. So if you're an expert maybe in history or something, or you are an actual practicing surgeon, but you have this data that you want to analyze, to what extent can these models help you to be able to accelerate your analysis process, particularly if you want to do it in that reproducible way where you have code and you have versions and things like that. So I thought back to a particular project where someone was a medical student training for some specialty, and she was trying to explore how doctors are prescribing certain types of medication. And she had this data set and she was like, oh my gosh, I want to use R, but I'm not the best coder. I mean, how could I do that? And so I wanted to recreate that experience for myself to understand what that might look like given the data set that she had. And if I was using ChatGPT or GPT-4, what kind of challenges might I run into? And so that is what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm just going to briefly share those experiences. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, and here we are. So this is what the data set might look like. So it's going to be something, right? It's going to be something. Usually, so this is a very clean version of that data set. You have some patient ID, which has some value associated with it. You have columns that look like this. She had appointment times, dates. The patients visited multiple times on different days, and it was over this time period. They had different doctors, different IDs. They had just a little bit of information here and there, and they had this formatted drug list that was extremely, when you have data, sometimes it just can look like however it looks, right? And so again, her idea was to examine really like the rate of prescription of particular drugs and some other research questions. So I asked myself, okay, so what would I do? So one thing that she was familiar with was there exists something called Tidyverse in R, and so that she could read in the data. And then so I thought to myself, well, what question might I ask to an assistant or someone who has familiarity with data science? And so I tried to phrase that same sort of question to ChatGPT first. And so this is where we're starting. So let's see what it says. So we're trying to process this medical data set. I really want to use Tidyverse, particular dplyr, because that's the tabular one. I tell it a little bit about the data that I have. So I'm just going to make that a little smaller and hopefully it'll speed itself up. Actually, we're just going to go ahead and move that forward. So we finished up the questions. I'm just saying, how do I get started with this? Like, what should I do? Something in particular that I talked about with this data set is the type of data that the IDs are. And so it ended up giving me some really great steps to start off with generally. I'm going to pause it. Oh, I can't go back. I have to physically not even scroll up. I got to drag. So one, we can see that it gives us some really great ideas. It talks about how we can even read the data sets, and it also talks about the structure, blah, 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 blah. We can talk about that more later. But it also talks about generally like cleaning data, looking at NAs, looking at visualizing your data. It actually gives us some great regular sorts of Tidyverse functions to be able to do our analysis. And then it gives us some additional information about these data types. Which is extremely interesting because hard disagree on some of the things that it said, particularly this line about integer data types for patient ID and doctor ID. Don't love that, but we're just going to move forward with that. That's just something that a lot of people engage with and understand through experience and explicit like teaching. So that's a little bit unfortunate, but the rest of the suggestions are pretty good. So assuming that I decide to use read CSV, I have some familiarity with that. I ask it actually what my research question is. Oh, going too far, too fast. Let's see. So I've said to it, okay, so the challenge here is that the data has all the drugs that they've been prescribed or have been prescribed in like a single cell as like a string list. But what I'm really trying to do is calculate how many times like these drugs have been prescribed or who's taking them. How do I do that with dplyr? And what's crazy is this is actually like a little bit hard. Like this is something that people have to, like you have to learn how to do this. And so it tells me that I can use the separate rows and counts, and then it gives me some really great code. So let's see, let's get there. So this is what it says to do. We can see that we have this copy code, blah, 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 and it tells me exactly what the things are meaning. So here it says what I should expect, and moving forward, we can just read a little bit more about what it means to separate rows. So here, let's see, we've successfully read our data. One, we can also see that this here is exactly what we would expect. Another interesting thing is that the blood pressure is still like this. It's a string. It's not things that we can actually compute on. That could be something that we ask about in the future, given that we know about this drug. So here what we have is exactly what ChatGPT said. And so I just copied and pasted that directly to experience what would be something that someone would find. So here we run that one. So then we get this error. So then I wondered to myself, okay, so if I'm faced with this error, what do I do? Maybe I can read this and maybe understand. It says this column drug doesn't exist. So in my brain, what might I do? I might see, does that exist? And here what I actually see is drugs with an S. Now, even that bit of insight to be able to think drugs instead of drug, that actually requires just like a little bit of coding experience to know that that's something that happens. And so, of course, once we realize that, we can go ahead and substitute that. But even that requires just a little bit of experience with coding, just to know what the issue is. And here we see that we get the tibble or the data frame tibble that we were looking for, that we do have these counts of these different prescriptions. So then we might say to ourselves, all right, we do love tables. Who doesn't love a table? But what we really love is a plot. And so how might we go about getting that? So in my brain, I might say to myself, all right, I know there's this thing that people use in R, it's ggplot, but then something layers, adding these different this, that, and the other, how am I going to do that? And so that is something also that I might decide to ask ChatGPT. You can see here, I actually already asked it, that's okay. And so we see that it gives me this answer here. And it tells me exactly what I can write. And I copied and I again pasted that here. One thing that I would have had to know as a programmer or had some experience with is, again, we have this issue that this isn't exactly named correctly. As we said before, Jesse was talking about, we could have actually corrected that at the beginning of our conversation by telling it the name of our columns. And so by that way, it would have been able to actually say the correct names. But here I didn't do that. And so now I'm faced with this issue. Also, I'm faced with the issue. If you look at this, it says, yeah, we need to assume that your data frame of prescription counts is named this thing. This assumes that we've created that, except for in the last step, I didn't really ask it to create this data frame the way it should be. And so that's something, again, that I would have to know to create. And I would also have to know how to create it. Or I could also ask ChatGPT how I should create that. And so here, just happening to know, maybe I have a little bit of experience with R, I know how to do that, and then I can just run the code as it says. So here we generate this plot. One thing that we do see, that's something to read there. Maybe we're happy just because we have this plot. We're like, oh my gosh, that's exciting. Okay, so then what we might want to actually answer is our question, our research question. And we're just going to assume for the moment that that column with the drug list in it is what the doctor prescribed during that visit, for the sake of the example. And so we want to know, does that prescription, do doctors just decide to prescribe drugs at a different sort of rate? And so again, here I am, I'm wondering, maybe I don't know about group by summarize. And so I again asked ChatGPT what it thinks about how I should approach that. So here we ask, let me see right quick. Let's just help it out a little bit. Oop, and you can't see that. So now I'm very much asking it this specific question about how the prescriptions are. Actually, this is about visit numbers. This is a different question a little bit. Oops, somebody skipped one. But essentially, I was interested in knowing. So maybe the doctors prescribe a different kind of medication later in visits. And so I wanted to know, okay, on visit 1, do they, prescribe this different sort of medication? Maybe at the end, I can see some sort of relationship. How can I do that? And so here it actually tells us how we can do it. And it actually gives a very nice description, how we're going to add this patient ID or add this this visit number based on this row number function. And so actually love this row number function uses your blah, 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 blah. Yes, so we're adding a different, okay. So then we actually can run that. Again, we did this one before. I think I skipped my things a little bit. It's okay. But here, this is also something that was generated by ChatGPT. I asked it about the doctors and it told me that I needed to group by essentially Dr. ID, which we have here. However, this is again not in my data frame. And so I needed to switch that to what's in my data frame. And so we get this new data frame, which we are then able to plot. Something that's really cool about this, this exploration is actually once it gives you this particular data frame, this one and the next one are so similar, it's a great learning moment. So I'm sure people who are just like learning how to code, they kind of want to test their understanding a little bit. They just don't want to copy and paste. This is a great moment to explore how it is that you can change different variables to get the desired result. Here also, once you have things like this, you have the basic body of what you need to execute. And at that point, it's easier to add things like position dodge. So maybe you don't want them stacked like this. Maybe you want them dodged out. Maybe you want some other sorts of values to add to Dr. ID. These are things that you can ask ChatGPT about now that you have a general framework of how things should be done. Also, it becomes easier to Google. So here,
quick question here. And what's really interesting to me is the interaction, and this is not generally known, and this is something that we are exploring right now, is what role does persona play in interacting with these types of this type of work. So for example, if we'd started by saying you're an expert in visualization, right, then would it have generated a ggplot where it was using color inappropriately, you know, where it had too many categorical variables with color? And we don't know yet, and it's probably going to vary depending on the model as well. But these types of design patterns, layering one on top of the other to see, you know, which works best, we are at the very beginning of this and exploring how well this can work.
that is such a great point. I wish I would have tried that. That's a great idea.
Well, you can right after this.
Exactly.
We can do it during the next hour.
Exactly. I think I will. So here we have something again very similar where we have these different patient IDs, or sorry, visit numbers. And so we've kind of looked at them in this way that maybe we don't want. We can also dodge it. We can begin to do different analysis. But I think even this is something with this set of statements here. Even this would be like this number of statements to be made about how to get these values out, especially needing to separate rows again and group by these different like components. This is something that ChatGPT can help us with. And if we're a beginner, we have a lot of progress very quickly, as opposed to having to just outright generate this on our own and then debug it. So these are just some examples about.
One other question too, did you give the errors back to it to ask it to correct it?
I love that question, and I love it so much. I have one more example, and we're going to talk all about the errors and it helping us. That's okay. But yes, I definitely have given it back those errors. Even, and this is not an error, but it's just an example of giving it back its own code. Did I have that one? Hold on. I think I do have this one. This is when I have asked it about the code that it generated. So it generated this code to make this earlier. And as Jesse was saying, literally you just copy and paste it on in, keep it moving, and then write what else you need to write. But here I said, hey, these are overlapping and jumbled. Like, how do we fix that? And then it just says exactly how to do it. It tells me why we're doing it like that. And then we have here 90 degrees. Not the best, maybe not the best. Looks better though, we can actually read the words. So there are some things that are very, very much helped by ChatGPT. I definitely see it as accelerating the ability to do research, particularly by those who are not you don't have a strict background in coding. So
I've got to add here too. It would take me a while to do this. You know, even though I've coded in R, God help me, since the beginning probably of R. It would take me a while to do this. There's no way I could have coded this fast. No way.
And so I wanted to give this particular example because I thought it was so interesting, and it's something that people actually run into pretty regularly. Actually, some students are running into it with me a little bit, but we're gonna move past it. So sometimes what happens is when you need to do an analysis, you don't actually have the data yet, right? You might know the structure of the data, but you don't have the actual values of that data. But maybe what you want to do is start your analysis anyway, just so you'll have the code to be able to generate the things that you're after. So as long as you know the structure of that data set, you kind of have a feeling of how it should look, the kind of data, the data types you're going to get, then you could actually generate this synthetic data set, which would help you to just write the code to be able to explore that data set. And so this data set actually was generated by GPT-4. And I just wanted to talk very briefly about how that was done. I think I have about 4 minutes to tell you. So one, yes, I did the same exact thing. Let me move this one over right quick. We just asked ChatGPT or GPT-4 in particular, how we could go about generating this demo data set. So this is a pretty long prompt, but I described this very much in depth. So we're saying, hey, I want you to generate these patients have been seen over this variable number of times from this period, add a doctor, add like these particular drugs that they might have taken, like, can you help me to generate this? And then so that's actually a very long prompt and it has many different pieces. And so that's why I selected GPT-4 to try to help out with this, because it does have that longer context. And if things sort of happen with it, I might be able to correct it a little bit. So this is what it generates. Something that's really interesting about this in particular is that it starts out by generating these functions, which is something that I really like. Whether the functions are correct, when I'm looking at this with my eyeballs and I'm like a beginner, maybe I don't know. So I guess the quickest way to do this is try to try it out. I'm just going to speed right on through this. So one, network error. So we got.
Now, you have a question from Gregor.
Sorry about that. Go ahead, Gregor.
No, I just didn't want to interrupt right away. But so do you get different responses if you have a long thought out prompt versus individual sequential prompts that you put in?
So I think it does vary, but I think if you're very, very like specific about some things, it puts things in a context where it is able to generate you better answers. I think some research has found that once it has like a solid context, if you break the questions down a little bit further, then it has more accurate responses for any of those broken down questions. But I think for GPT-4, at least in my experience, it is needed to have some background in what it's even trying to reason about.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem. And so here we did have like a little bit of an error. That's okay. We're just going to move forward with that. We're going to copy that and try to give it a run. Oop, what is this? Okay, we already have that. Oh, so I'm just not closing them. So then I tried to run that one. It was looking good right up until this last one, right? And it said typical columns must have compatible sizes, blah, 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 blah. I read this and even in my brain, I was like, I know what this is trying to get at, but I know. So we're just going to ask ChatGPT. And so let's see. So then I put in the particular error. So actually actually let's speed this up because we need to go through it. Yes, there was actually another error, which is generate times. I might be a little bit out of order. Where's this number one? This is a different error that I was getting. I think I got it before. Maybe I fixed it. I fixed it in here. But here, this is the function. Which, let me move that. Oops, sorry. This is the function that it wrote for me. And then we can see here, I put in specifically that error, right? And I said, how do I fix the code to eliminate this error? And it tells me actually how to do it. Sorry, it actually takes a second right there. Okay, there we go. And then it says, hey, do that. Great, exciting. I think that did fix one of my errors. And then let's see. There was another error. Let's go to that one. Yep, so that is what that error was. And then I went to another one. Let's make it. And I think this is going to be the specific error that we're talking about here. So here, this is a synthetic, this line here. Or paste in. There it goes. The error is, there it is. I even left that little symbol in there. How can I fix it? It says, I'm so sorry. JK, here we go. Try this one. And so actually it gives me some code. In the interest of time, I'm just going to ease on over one. I do like this reproducibility, because actually there's some random values generated here. This is here and there. Actually, it is here and there, and it's very important. This was a different error randomly that I got because of the network error, but we're going to move past this one. This is the original. And so here, I think this is what was just generated. It was like, no, just try this one. This one ran, and it ran really, really nicely. So here we get all the things that we were after. And we can see here that we have the drugs. Now, I will say what I was originally after with this was individual columns of drugs, but this is doing, we know that we can separate those out if we want to. The point of consternation for me was this. I looked at that and I was like, maybe there's an easier way to phrase that in code. Is that something that we can try? Of course, what did I do next? I asked ChatGPT, or GPT-4, sorry if I keep saying ChatGPT, it's the one I tend to use the most. Let's speed this right on up. So let's see what I asked it. I said, hey, I'm a beginner. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to let it run. Beginner. And I said, hey, you wrote this. That's pretty complex for me. Is there a more clear or obvious way for me to write this code? And it was like, yeah, let me help you with this. And so this is still yet a little bit complex, and yet it fits better into the tidyverse about how one would write this. So in the interest of time, again, we're just going to ease away from that. And we see here what it did do. It actually used this map function, which I like a lot better. It's fantastic. And it comes from per, and we use that a lot more with the tidyverse. But now a new problem, it's not an error, but it is a problem. Here we don't have the list. It returns like a list structure, but not a string, a comma separated string, right? And so that's actually what I wanted. But I also wanted to see what happens if I ask it questions around this behavior. So last little interaction with GPT-4. Here I say, let's get there. The output is, so someone was talking about that, you give it these little response feelings. And I did want to say I do that because I don't know if it's something that, it is something that affects the model, but I like it to know that it's in the right area. Might give it like this 0.5 sort of certainty kind of feeling. And then, this aggravated response might encourage it to move in a different part of its little brain space. Sorry, anthropomizing there. But here we can see exactly how I wrote it. So I said, the output for drugs is a list data type, and it has this thing like, how do I need to get to the actual string? How do I do this in code? And again, it's going to tell me how to do that. And what it's going to show is that I need to use, instead of map, I need to use map_CHR. And then it actually does a great job of explaining what the difference between map and map_CHR is. And you can see here that we actually get what we were after. So in summary, we can see here that GPT-4, ChatGPT, we can leverage its ability to write code, but also be able to modify its code that it's writing based on the things that we ask it afterwards. And also we're able to modify those statements with the errors that are actually output by R. And so again, I am just greatly interested in the way that people who maybe don't code the most can use ChatGPT, GPT-4 as their allies in this goal toward using code to do exploration in their research. If you have ideas, if you have experiences, if you have students that work with this, trying to answer your research questions, I'm dying to know. I want to know all about it. And if you have ideas already, then I would love to talk to you also in the next session. So thanks for your time.
So I'm going to remind you again, starting right at 2:30, we're going to start an hour of open session. So would love for you to bring your ideas and questions there. Again, this is early days, and we're still iterating on this. But even in the very earliest days, this appears to be quite valuable in coding. And like I said, it would have sped me up quite a bit with that. It would take me quite some time. Umang, can you talk a little bit more about perhaps some uses of these models in classrooms?
Sure. Can you hear me? All right. So I'll talk a little bit about using these types of models in class. So the kind of idea around which I've base this entire quick demo is, say we're in a college level transformers class. We're specifically learning about transformers. And one of the best papers to start with when you're learning about transformers is the original paper, which is Attention is All You Need. So just so that we can kind of see how the ability to access the internet would change these models, we're going to specifically look at Bing GPT or Bing Chat right now. This is slightly different from ChatGPT. So I guess starting as of last week, ChatGPT and OpenAI introduced plugins which allow you to actually access the internet using GPT-4 and GPT 3.5, but those are on a wait list right now, so we can't actually see that in action. But essentially, this is sort of how we would expect it to work. So, for example, I went ahead and asked Bing GPT, summarize the main points of the article, attention is all you need. So it's very likely ChatGPT also knows what this article is, but just to see how having access to the internet works. So what Bing does is it searches Google, or I guess Bing's attention is all you need, Vaswani summary. And then it generates answers for me. It's a pretty very high level overview of what the paper is about. It gives me a couple of citations, which is really nice because I can, see somebody actually wrote a summary for this paper, and I can actually go to the actual paper itself as well. So it's pretty useful when it comes to that. But say I wanted to specifically look at the section that describes the model architecture. It can't do that for some reason, but because it doesn't actually have access to the paper itself, when you go to the website to look at the specific paper, you actually end up on this website, which doesn't actually give you the paper. You need to click on PDF here and download it, and then you're able to see it. So it isn't able to directly read the paper itself. But if I were to be a little bit more detailed and say explain the attention mechanism described in the paper to me at a high school level, it does that, and it very briefly says, okay, this paper that you're talking about also describes a new type of attention mechanism, but these are just ideas that it finds easily off the internet without actually having to download a document of any kind. Similarly, it does the same thing at a college level. It does a much better job. It actually covers specific points from the paper itself. It talks about the scale dot product attention, talks about multi-head attention, but again, at a very, very high level. One thing that you can definitely use this for in class is if you ask it to generate some quiz questions based off of any given paper. So I said, give me quiz questions at a college level course, also provide the solutions to these answers. And so it gave me some good questions, again, very, very high level overview of the paper because it, again, isn't actually able to read it. One thing that I recently found out about these models is that at least Bing can't actually go to a link that you give it. It needs to kind of just be able to search for it on the internet. So if it is a very easily available paper or kind of like an open source paper, you'll probably be able to find more information. But if it's behind some sort of a paywall at the moment, you won't be able to really access it. But with the introduction of all the plugins with ChatGPT, we're hoping that we can kind of combine all the plugins, give it instructions on actually how to give it login details, say log into this website, log into JSTOR with my ID, here's the username, password, use APIs to actually be able to access things that might be behind paywalls.
Just be clear with you wouldn't necessarily be uploading that to the web, but with plugins, with some plugins and with LangChain that I think you may or may not have a chance to mention, you can keep part of that local. So some of it can be secure and local, but you're also using the models up here.
Right. So it does do a better job if I were to say point it to a Wikipedia page. So Wikipedia has a page on Transformers called Transformers Machine Learning Model. And then I specifically ask, can you explain the section titled architecture? And it does a pretty good job of it. It covers quite a lot of the main details, and it does a overall better job compared to the paper itself. I also asked the model to give me 5 papers like this one because I'm trying to cover the basics of transformers and I'm trying to learn more about them. It wasn't able to find papers that are similar to Attention is All You Need because it actually searched papers like Attention is All You Need. And I'm sure the web results from that aren't particularly great, but it still was useful. It pointed me to some good papers on important models, especially when trying to like just start off. I definitely want to know about Bert and Roberta and Albert. So good places to start. But again, I think the whole idea behind this is even though you have access to the internet, the way you structure your queries and prompts is almost more important than the fact that you can actually access the internet. Most of this stuff is really boils down to how you ask these questions. For example, I also gave the model the actual abstract from the paper, and it summarized it much better. The actual summary that it gave me just from the abstract itself is longer than what it could find off of the internet on its own.
You have a question from
Dr.
Dr.
Yeah, you have a question.
Yes, and I think you just kind of touched on it when you pasted the abstract. When you send it to a link or send it to a web page and it's combing through that information, does that use up your tokens or does that count as token usage? Or and then how much of the tokens is it using versus when you're like literally pasting content in there and you can say like discretely how many tokens you're consuming?
So when it's going out and going to the web, it's actually going out, using the tool, putting it back into the context. So everything has to be in context for it to do any reasoning, summarization, question answering, anything. It's got to be in the context. So so you are going through your tokens.
Right. So kind of building on top of this. So Bing works great. It has access to the internet, but again, it's really important that we structure our prompts really well. A couple of other tools that exist out there to really take these models to the next level and help you use them as well as they can be used is something called LangChain. So LangChain is a Python package and just a framework in general that allows you to develop applications alongside these language models. So they use various types of APIs and modules, but essentially the idea is that you can put these tools on top of these language models and build applications really, really easily. For example, you can build personal assistants, chat bots, interact with APIs, summarization, evaluation. LangChain has just given us good structure in order to just build these applications. You just give it your OpenAI API key, and then you just use the built-in modules from LangChain in order to develop some very simple apps. There are a couple of examples that I thought would be really cool to look at.
And while you're pulling this up, I will mention we'll be touching on LangChain and plugins as part of our AI summer and talking about how you can use these tools together to build new types of solutions. Maybe for your research, maybe for classes. I'll also give you a little bit of a preview, but I'll actually be announcing this tomorrow during an afternoon talk. We will be offering support to instructors, especially who are interested in building tools for teaching. If you're willing to share your tools with your colleagues and with others, we're going to have a program over the summer to help you build materials for your classes. So stay tuned for more tomorrow.
Yeah. So as I was saying, pretty simple setup for LangChain. You give it your OpenAI API key, and save that to your environment. And it's pretty simple. You give it a model. LangChain has various sub packages and modules that you can use. So you give it the name of the model that you want to use, and you simply just give it some text. What would be a good company name for a company that makes colorful socks, and it gives you an answer, and it's using one of the models that you asked it to use in the background. They make it really simple without actually having to use other APIs as well. But if you did want to kind of go in a little bit deeper, OpenAI has its own set of APIs, which also make it really easy. The one biggest difference that I've seen in in using the models behind ChatGPT from the API versus using it from the UI is that you're able to actually give it a configuration. So for example, Right, it's right here. So when you're making, so all of these are REST API type of API endpoints. So the only thing that I wanted to point out was you're able to define roles when it comes to using the API. So there are three types of roles that you could have. One is the user, which would be you. One is the actual context. So the context that you might give it, which could be a document or an article of some kind. And the last one is system. So you can actually kind of give it that persona right in the beginning so that it does everything as per that persona. So if I were to give it a system role saying that you are a Michelin star chef, and then I start asking it recipes, every time I ask it for a recipe, it'll ensure that it gives me high quality recipes compared to if I just ask for a recipe from ChatGPT out of the box, it'll probably like put things together and not give me a very coherent recipe, but I'm able to kind of generate that persona using the system role through the API, which is something you can't do necessarily through the UI. You could specifically kind of put in first as a prompt saying you are a Michelin star chef and I want you to give me recipes of some kind. You could say that as a separate prompt, but you can't explicitly set the role of the system as, or you can't like set that persona just through the UI otherwise. Yeah, that's kind of it.
All right. So thank you very much, Umang. Thank you, Charo. Thank you, Abby. I hope that you've gotten a sense of the variety of things that you can do with GPT models. Important thing that I'll just remind you about, just to keep in mind, is keep in mind these prompt patterns. You know, these are all different things that you can do. You can do a tremendous number of things. But if you keep in mind sort of this high level pattern and that you can mix and match these, that you can combine these, you could do a persona along with a flipped interaction. You know, so you are an expert in transformers, and I'd like for you to quiz me. You know, so you can mix and match these to actually get new types of capabilities. Also know that coming very soon, you know, being released right now is the ability to work with these models through an API as well. So I know I can name at least 6 groups that are building businesses around this right now, and they're building the businesses around those APIs. So this is very fast moving. You're going to see many new products that are going to be developed over time. But know that even with the straightforward web-based prompt, you can do amazing things if you give some thought into the prompts that you're going to be using. Well, great. Thank you very much. Let me stop here. Let me take any questions that you have, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back for our 1-hour clinic. So final questions from folks as we finish out this portion of the workshop. Thank you, Corey. I had one question that was asked before. What was the difference between ChatGPT and GPT-4? Big difference. GPT-4 is the successor. GPT-3 has been around for a long time. Older tokens, older architecture. GPT-4, they did not release what the architecture is, but we do know that it is very likely larger, and that certainly it has a much, much longer context. And also the performance that you see is human level performance on many human level tests, like AP exams, makes 5s on most AP exams. Funny enough, doesn't do as well with composition. So as a writing competition, it got like a 2 and a 3, but everything else, AP history, you know, European history, chemistry, all that, it was making 5s across the board. It made a 90th percentile on the bar exam for lawyers, also for some medical exams, also performing really top. So it's a very, very performant and knowledgeable model. That's what GPT-4 is. All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a, feel free to take a 5-minute break. I'll be back shorter than that, but we'll take a brief break and then we'll get started on our open clinic. For the open clinic, we'll be able to open up rooms. So if you have particular questions or ideas, we'll be able to open up Zoom rooms for you to go and to talk with one of our members of our data science team. But thank you very much for your time and for your questions and for your attention. It was a pleasure having you in the workshop today. See you all soon. Hope to see you in about 5 minutes. All right, we're at 2:35. So I'd say, let's go ahead and let's get started. So at this point, we're going to open it up for questions. And if you have questions, if you have a particular prompt that you would like to work through, we can open up Zoom rooms so we can work those. But we'll start with just questions from anybody about anything that we've covered, or questions or guidance about particular prompts. Yes, Dr. Yao.
Thank you so much. So I have a general question about something I've been trying to work through. Whenever I try to use ChatGPT to reply back, then it will rephrase it in a better way than I would say it, but sort of not my voice. I guess I write with a lot of split infinitives and adverbs and whatnot. And I've been trying to get it closer to doing that so I wouldn't have to change as much of the output. Certainly it explains things clearer than when I just kind of ramble on. But at the same time, I still have to do a lot of modification. And I'm wondering if there's an easy way or a better approach to trying to get it to sound more like you.
Yes,
I tried playing around with pasting some of my own content in there, be like,
Mhm.
make it sound like this, but it's still kind of missing the target. And I don't know if it's even feasible just with the way it is currently.
Are you using ChatGPT or GPT-4?
4.
4. And how many examples of writing are you giving it?
A handful. Like I'd paste maybe replies back from 4 emails. And I'm not really sure how much is enough, and that maybe that's part of it. So I'd paste some emails in there and I'd say what is the style of this? I'm like, well, memorize that style and apply it to this response back that you gave me. And I don't know, it will pick up more of the tone. It'll be like, this is very excited. I'm like, well, yeah, but I really want the sense and structure. And I'm still not able to really capture that as well. And I'm just not sure if that's just something too complex to try to ask the models to try to do.
Got it. No, absolutely. Have you, do you have any of the prompts you could share? And have you explicitly said, copy the style of writing, or you might have even started there. Copy using the style of writing as exemplified above, draft the response. And that was it didn't get close then.
Not as close as I wanted it to get to. And maybe I'm being overly critical. Maybe someone else wouldn't have been able to pick up on the differences between how it said it and how I said it. But for example, whenever it writes back a response, when I'll say reply back to this letter, it always says, hello, so-and-so, I hope this message finds you well. I don't know if anyone else sees that, but that's a very simple, I hope this message finds you well. I'm like, I never say that. And even when I did that, and then I had it regenerate the response, that was still in there. And I was like, well, I don't know, it missed something.
No, absolutely. And have you gotten anywhere where it's close? And be sure to pay attention to chat. So Shara Bell was just putting something up there. What we'll do is we're going to create different rooms if people have particular interests. So be sure to respond on chat there. Have you combined this with question refinement yet? But you have to get to the point where you're happy with it at first, and then you can say, is there a way for me to describe, summarizing everything that we got before? Have you done that? Asked for that refinement?
Probably not well enough. And that's probably what I need to play with some more, just better shaping what it is I want it to do. I think my initial prompts will just be something along the lines of, please analyze this writing style and respond back to this verbiage that you gave me to make it sound like this. And I think maybe that's too vague when I say make it sound like this. And then it'll give me something back that's it's not as formal, but it's still it's different enough. But maybe I didn't give it enough of my writing for it to pick up on.
That's what I'm thinking is possible, because remember, it can do that for other writers like Jeremy Howard.
Yeah.
Now he has a ton of writing on the internet, right? Hundreds of things that he's written. So I'm wondering, and then the trick is, because you don't want to burn through your context every time. But if you need 20 examples, okay, then 20 examples, and then you ask it the one question. it's a lot more processing. And then the question is, and you started to go down this line of how do you better describe what that style is? So you might not need to give it all those, but first you have to get in the neighborhood of, and you can say, how could you describe the writing style such that you can reliably reproduce this style without being exposed to all of these examples. But first you have to get, so it may be, you may be like a dozen, to try. Would you want to try those out, or is that just sort of a general question?
Oh, I'm gonna dig through some more and start playing with this some more now that I have some better verbiage from you. So yeah, no, thanks. That was really helpful.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, and let's see. To let the ChatGPT maintain a persona over conversation. Oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting. A persona. What if you described yourself?
That's interesting. I wonder if I could catch myself well enough.
Oh yeah, right.
Perhaps, I don't know.
And that might get you closer in the style.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so I think it'd be worthwhile trying. And if you so a couple of questions here with Paris. To maintain it, it has to be in the context. That's right. So if, for example, you define a persona and then your context goes beyond the end, that context is going to be moving down. It's going to start forgetting that persona. That's what happened with Bing GPT at the very beginning. So yeah, you need to repeat that. The nice thing about the system prompt is that it seems to re-inject it whenever it needs it. So it's, I don't know, and I have to look to see exactly how it's doing, but so that's what's happening up Paris. Is there a better way to do this? Well, one thing we didn't talk about was that you can have specialized versions of the models. So much smaller versions of the models that you might domain adapt to do a special type of reinforcement learning. So if you have something that you want to do again and again and again, and you want to own it, that is one possibility, but we don't know what the capabilities of those models are, whether you can do reinforcement learning from human feedback, what it would look like, but there is that possibility of having your very own model, just trained on your very own data. So that's always a possibility.
That's a good point.
And Corey, you had a question. Could you use the game pattern to play with style and then somehow use the winner in the game as your style input? That's interesting. Yeah, so game pattern to say, generate another one. I like this one over this one, almost like a reinforcement learning, from human feedback, because you yourself don't know how to describe your style yet, but you yourself know it when you see it.
That's really clever.
I like that, Corey. Yeah. And maybe here, I'm going to go ahead and create a room here, which is, I'm going to call it email generator. And then if we want to, we can hop in there to maybe play with some of these things. Okay. Okay, Ashley. Oh, hey, Ashley. Good to see your name there.
Hello.
And good to hear your voice. So you asked using a probably fine-tuned ChatGPT model to return high-level summaries of cost data sets in place of querying the same data set in SQL. What was the most expensive data space instance of a particular account? Interesting. So now, of course, Ashley, you could ask it to generate. So one thing that I've done is I've given it the schema of data and then asked it to generate code or SQL based on that schema. And much like what Charo was doing, asking this high-level question, so long as the category, the column names are semantic, they make sense, or if you describe them, then you may very well be able to get it to answer the question by generating a query for you. Yeah. But you're kind of interested in putting the data in and having it reason with the data directly. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, I think that's, yeah. was kind of the point behind it, was for people who don't have the time to go or the permissions, say, to go query the data directly.
Mhm.
Yeah, to just like get a high level summary of that.
Yeah. And Casey, I don't know if you're here. Let me check and see if you're here. I was talking to Casey, one of our students right now, about this yesterday, but more with sports analytics, because he works with the sports teams here. This may be a good case for the alpaca small models, where you actually, train it extensively on the data. Keep in mind, but even then, you're not guaranteed it's going to be correct, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be generally correct. The plugins may come in very handy here.
Yeah, that would be my, is like, it's the data it would be working with, isn't text. It's not, it's, it's CSV.
Which is not bad. I mean, it can deal with that if it has semantic column headers. But plug in here, especially, so lang chain plus a plugin here, where it'd be like, it could log in using like service credentials or something like that. I think may be the way to go.
Yeah.
To be able to ask the general questions, but know that it's correct.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, and can you put academic statistician and biostatistician in the system role? I do not know how far those roles go. I think they go pretty deep. And I would love to, I'm going to go and create a room called expert statistician.
I can speak to statistician, actually, because we were trying to see if we could do some statistical analysis. This was with 3.5 because we did it before, and I didn't reproduce it with 4. And I even took it to one of my biostats colleagues. They're like, this explanation is very reasonable. The math was wrong, but she was like, but if you just follow what they're explaining, this is reasonable. She did say, however, that it makes assumptions about your data that a statistician who was going through your project with you might have asked you before. So it's one of those things that you don't know what you don't know. So like, it didn't ask me if my data was normalized or any of that stuff, and other things that, you need to know.
Flipped, right?
Which path to go down.
So actually, and that would be a perfect example of persona plus flipped. You're an expert statistician. Ask me questions until you are ready to answer the following question.
Yes.
It's fascinating to see at that point it would say, all right, and then go through the assumptions.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because before we were just like, hey, do a t-test. And she was like, well, that might not be the right test. So,
but I'm wondering if it could do a good job and ask the right questions. It would be a lot of fun to sit with a statistician to see if it's asking the right questions. And my interest would be do it with and without that persona.
that's a good one. When for the different roles to impersonate, I think very intentionally and I think appropriately, whenever I ask it to be like an oncologist or rheumatologist, like I'm not a doctor, but I'm wondering if there are any other fields where it tries to kind of like absolves itself of responsibility if it were to give. But I don't think anything's too risky with a biostatistician, but I don't know if you've encountered that with personas, but like it will be like, I am not a doctor, probably lawyer, if that also, but I'm wondering if there are any other fields where it will very much.
I know that you've seen it with doctor, an amazing example. I had another person just shortly after I got that communication from you, who did this with a vet.
Ooh.
Because their dog was not responding to medication. Said, okay, you are a vet. And in that case, it did not say, I am not a vet. But it started and actually came up with the diagnosis that the actual vet said, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Treated the dog survived.
That's amazing.
Yeah. All right, other questions? And does yes, Raymond.
Yeah, I keep finding new and creative ways to butcher my application for the AI summer. But what I'm wanting to do with this is I'm trying to pare down a big picture idea into a platform, maybe a mini app, using this for helping neurodivergent populations. And I was thinking of like, I unfortunately had to take a phone call, but like, when you're talking about personas, I would be curious to see if they created one for a hypothetical autistic person as an example.
Raymond, that's not a bad idea. Description, or I think that would be, I think that would be a good one to experiment with and see if it does even a passable job. It'd be interesting to think about the task for that. Let's go and do this. Let's let me go and open up some rooms if I could real quickly. Ya, would you want to go and talk more about email generation? Would you want to explore this? Okay, great. I have one room for that. We have another room for expert statistician to see about that role. What other broad questions do you have? And I can open up rooms. So there are 4 of the data science folks here, but you don't necessarily have to have one of us in the room. What are some other rooms you would like me to create so you can get into smaller groups and talk?
Can we have another for like teaching and curriculum? So teaching course, how to, revise or use this technology to better enrich learning outcomes.
Absolutely. And we will absolutely be doing some of those workshops over the summer as we are doing our data science for social good. So look for more workshops on this as well. That'll be very targeted about, like classroom use. Yeah. All right. Any other rooms you would like to have open? Yeah, that's right. So yeah, so Dr. Schmidt is actually going to be talking tomorrow as well. So we did had a great conversation and with alumni of VU School of Engineering, and so you'll be hearing a little bit more about that tomorrow in the afternoon. All right, so I'm going to open the rooms, and you're going to have the ability to invite yourself into the room. So if you're interested in one of those areas, go ahead and let yourself in, and we'll jump into the room. So Cheryl, you're going to take the teaching room, I take it. Umang, do you want to take the expert one?
Yep.
Okay, great. And I'll do the Gmail. Abby, if you wouldn't mind staying here and seeing if other people want to go into other rooms as well. All right.
Yeah, Dr. Spencer Smith. I'm apparently either here or room 4 through 10, and I'm not sure which.
Okay, let's see. So you ought to be able to click and join in any of the rooms that you would like to.
Okay, I just didn't know. I'll go to room 4 then, with the idea about trying to generate autistic persona.
Okay, great. So and I will hop over there in a little bit.
Okay.
So I won't be there right away because I'm going to do the email first, and then I'll hop over to there.
All right, yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, great. And I'll create that now. There we go. Great. All right, I'm going to hop into email, and Abby, you're going to hold down the fort here. Excellent, great.
Oh, that's the other Jesse. Yeah, the people who are not in rooms, does anyone have any any questions you want to ask? How do you join rooms? I think at the bottom, the little bar that comes up has a thing called breakout rooms, and you should be able to just see the list and click the join button on the right. But let me know if for some reason you don't see that.
Heard there's this cool project about gravitational waves.
Yeah, it'll be fun if ChatGPT can help with that at all. should ask it to explain gravity waves to me.
Yeah, there you go.
If anybody also has any, like, just if you want to, like, if you don't have ChatGPT Plus or something and you want to just type a prompt in the chat and I can just try to input it and we can see what GPT says, we can also try that.
Have you found a noticeable difference between GPT 3 and 4?
I have, so yeah, GPT-4 seems a lot smarter, but I think that that's also kind of dangerous because it's like so good at making stuff up. It's really hard to tell when it's like lying to you. And it's so good at it that like it also tries to lie to you all the time. Which you can try to mitigate by like, I think Jesse might have talked about this, how you can try to mitigate it by like at the top of your thing, tell it like, if you don't know, please like tell me you don't know or know what parts of, you know, why you don't have an answer to this question or something, or like, please don't make up information. But it still really likes to, and it's so convincing.
Wow.
Well, that's hilarious. I might have, I might have, breakout rooms close automatically after 4 minutes. Let's uncheck that. Down, allow to return to the main section. I don't believe, okay. Let's try this one more time.
Okay, another 4 minutes.
All right, I'm going to open them up again and y'all can get yourself back in there if you want to.
Talk
All right,
about attention.
dude.
Has GPT-4 gotten better at solving math equations? Maybe it reaches out to Wolfram Alpha every now and again. I know it's GPT-3 if you give it some even semi-complex equations, it totally falls on its face.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit better, but I don't know about like solving complex problems. I saw actually, because I still get physics and astronomy department emails, and I got one the other day of somebody trying to like, just like a physics 2 problem, trying to see if GPT could answer it for them. And it was weird because the math actually was right, but it wouldn't like listen to the assumptions about the problem correctly. So it like was a question about a particular type of motor, and it just was like assuming a different type of motor. And then, you know, the person who passed around the email like tried to correct it like several times and just like couldn't get it to listen. Which is, I think, a little bit of kind of, I think that for me right now, that's kind of the biggest limitation with GPT-4 going forward, is more like that it kind of seems like when it can't do something, there can be times where there's like no way to get it to do the right thing. Like we had an AI Valentine's event recently back in February, and we were trying to get GPT to like create poems for us, and you would explicitly tell it like to create a non-rhyming poem, and it just like would not listen. And you could have a conversation with 20 times you were like, please make this poem not rhyme, and it wouldn't listen. And so it's tough when it seems to just be like incapable of doing the task, even though you're like, I know you understand, like I know you know what rhyming is, I know you could just not do it. but I think that that's something that like probably in our AI summer we'll address a little bit more, is kind of when it seems like you can't just through like clever prompting get something to happen, where it really seems to just like not want to listen to you at all. But I mean, it GPT-4 knows like basic math a lot better. So like, for instance, I asked it to like a task that GPT-3 would even struggle with is like, oh, I want to give like a 1-hour talk and I want to cover these like 10 topics. Can you like tell me how to divide up the talk? And like it would give you a schedule of how long to spend on everything. But if you like totaled it up, it wouldn't total an hour. Like even like basic stuff like that, it seemed to not do a great job keeping track of. And definitely little things like that, GPT-4 seems to not mess up ever anymore, which is good.
There was a test last week I had. I think I was giving it a 3x4 matrix, and I was like, oh, I asked questions about it, and the answers, some of them, like you said, were convincing. Some of them were way off. I'm like, how can you be this far off? And I was like, show me the matrix again. And it was a 4x4. I was like, no, it's a 3x3. So here it is again. Try again. It's like, okay, show me the output. 4x4. I'm like, man, really? you're adding an extra row here. Where's this magical data coming from? Just kept adding that row. It doesn't seem to like doing odd numbered matrix for whatever reason.
Yeah, I wonder if that same thing you had put into just code, because it does code so well. Like if you gave it the code for a matrix, mayhaps it would better be able to keep track of it because it like understands what that thing means in code, you know?
Yeah, it does seem to understand code quite a bit better than just a raw typing up an equation or trying to use special characters to try to organize some sort of math equation or something like that.
If you do want to use special characters, unless they're really well recognized, you'd want to do something like that meta language creation, at the very first, to just sort of define your terms and then have it do it. But one of the plugins is for like Wolfram Alpha and other things like that. In that case, I mean, you can just make a call out to that, and say, describe the equation there and then have it come back. That's going to be a huge accelerator.
That'd be really interesting. I was making a joke about it earlier, saying like, oh, I wonder if it's going to talk to Wolfram Alpha about something. Is that a GPT-4 specific item, or is that for any of them?
It is an OpenAI. It's an OpenAI plugin, and they're one of the first ones, and it's already there. So yes, it is going to use Wolfram Alpha. I have Wolfram Alpha.
Yeah, when the plugins all become totally available, it's going to be so exciting. There's going to be so much that you can do that now is like a bit of a struggle.
Yeah, and and with LangChain, where you can sort of put these things together, especially this idea of being able to chain one language model with another, right? So like you could have a prompt which just does takes any prompt that you have, but then does question refinement on it and then feeds that into GPT-4, right? I mean, there's nothing keeping you from doing that, and that way you could have a terrible prompt, but it knows your history, it knows what you're trying to do, rewrites it so it's better, and then submits that.
Yeah.
I mean, all of this, and we started to build some of this stuff last summer, using AWS. But man, it is going to be so much easier to build this with LangChain and the plugins.
Yeah, with the code stuff too, I'm like waiting for maybe. Yeah, I'm sure someone will come up with it. But when when Shuro was doing the coding example, and you were talking about how like, oh, did you give it back some of these errors? I'm waiting for someone to like write that automatic pipeline of like,
yeah,
I write code and you just, before I ever see the code, you've already fed it back its errors because I've had to do that myself and I've ended up with really amazing code. But after 20 minutes of me, like, I get this error when I run it, and then it rewrites it and it fixes that error. And then it's like, okay, now I get this error when I run it. But then at the end, like it can fix itself. It's just that it doesn't know that the code that it wrote had errors at the
So
start.
LangChain has an error. They don't call them objects. And Umang's not here right now, but it has an error module, and it's specifically for that. And so, because that's perfect for LangChain, right? Because then what you're talking about is, here's some output. Now what you want to do is you want to do something with the output, and then you want to do something with the output from that output, and then go back. And so that's exactly what LangChain does. It's chaining together different language models. So that's like the way to do that, which is, or you make it iterate until it's not erroring out anymore.
Yeah.
And Jim, you had a question, maybe this question, can an AI app like ChatGPT used in a closed system like an intranet? Yes. But you have to use something like Alpaca. So this is really interesting. There was a semi-open source model called Llama from Google. But Llama did not have the, remember we had to, you take the base model and then you do instruction fine-tuning and then you do reinforcement learning from human feedback. So Llama was just down here, basic model, but a good one. And could be smaller. So they took a 30 billion and a 7 billion parameter, so much smaller than ChatGPT, but they gave it intensive fine-tuning, instruction fine-tuning using ChatGPT. So they generated training examples from ChatGPT and then got it up to a really good performance. And it's performing about as well as ChatGPT on a number of different things. And you can run it on your local computer. It has to be beefy, but you could run it. Matter of fact, on Google Colab Pro, you can run Alpaca 30 billion parameters, just barely, but it will run. So that means that it would be on-prem. Well, I mean, Colab Pro isn't on-prem, but you could run it someplace on-prem, do domain adaptation so it knows a particular data set, get that instruction fine-tuning and maybe the reinforcement learning from human feedback. This one, I'm unsure about how well a 30 billion parameter or 7 billion parameter model could do, whether it can learn the nuance or not, open question. But you can use these much larger models to provide training to these smaller models and get amazing performance. And that's all internal. So yeah, you could do intra. Is there a possibility for automated software testing? Absolutely. So one of the cool examples that Jules White did was analyzing code. His persona was, you are a security expert. Analyze the following code from the perspective of security vulnerabilities. And it did a great job of pointing out, hey, you have a possibility of an injection attack here. Hey, this library which is being used has known vulnerabilities. It was terrific. Now, software testing. We are working through re-engineering our intro to programming for data science master students. Also, same thing in Department of Computer Science, where Jules is leading up an AI committee to look at the same thing on the computer science side. And in my mind, what these tools are going to allow us to do is to flip what we're doing. So we can immediately start teaching good software engineering principles and good test-driven development. Start with that, because you can absolutely say, here's what I want to write, here's some tests, or help suggest some tests for me. Okay, given these tests now, or write the code, run the code against the tests, tell me where it fails. Right? So you don't have to, you can start teaching at that level and then have them learn the coding as they interact with it. Well, what does this do? Well, you can give the code to ChatGPT and say, or GPT-4, and say, explain this code to me, describe to me in simple terms how this code works. So think about, this is the difference in like language learning, like foreign language learning. Memorize this list of words, memorize these rules of how these words go, to here are all the conversations that we'd want to have. And at any point you can pause in the conversation and describe what's going on, and you can do some useful things and learn as you are practicing good engineering. So that's what's on my mind right now. How large a piece of software can you give it? Well, GPT-4, remember, has 25K or 32K in the large instance context, and a lot of those are like single token. So it's not bad. So you can put a fairly, multiple pages of computer code in there. So, you can say, I want to write a function that will exist within this ecosystem or this object, right, that will interact properly given all this other. So I think that gives a lot more power, because it's not just like, oh, write this thing and it needs to interact in this way. You can say, here's everything before. So you can see the coding style, you can see exactly what we're doing. Now write this additional piece or extend it, or even just say, I want to add this capability to this software. Add the capability to this software. And because keep in mind, what it's been trained on is issues, issues, branches, and pull requests. So it understands this high level description. So it may very well be able to do all the coding to accomplish this. But here you'd also want to describe exactly what's happening, what the tests are. You'd want to have the rationale so it can do a good job of coding. Other questions or ideas? And is there another room that you all would like me to open up? You think all the different tasks transformers are capable of will be condensed into one model? They're kind of in one model right now, right? I mean, they're all in GPT-4. The interesting thing is it going to learn from the plugins? And I don't know. Right near there's that problem where oh, and Jamie, I'm going to get to your question. Do not leave before I answer your question, because there's a very cool example. I think that there's that basic problem first of, can you continue training a model after you've done reinforcement learning for human feedback? Or do you have to like strip that off, do the additional training, and then do your instruction fine-tuning and the RLHF again? I don't know. And I think that's, I would imagine that's a matter of intense discussion right now at these companies. It certainly is in the more open source. But right now, it is all in one model, GPT-4. And the question may almost be a flip side one, is how much can you move into a smaller model that you sort of know completely about? See, if a smaller model can absolutely make it update for your particular areas. Does that answer your question, Liam?
Yeah. I was mainly interested in seeing just how, like, right now we have Dall-E, Whisper, GPT-4, and it seems like all of these things are going to be combined, given the like the different mediums of like.
I see what you, those different kinds of models. Yeah. So in the case of Dall-E, I don't think so, because Dall-E is a beast, and it doesn't need to be. Stable Diffusion showed that you don't have to do that diffusion and image generation in the pixel space, which is what Dall-E does, which means it is huge. Instead, you can work in the latent space and get just as good images, but at like 1/100th or 1/1000th of the compute cost. So Dall-E, I think, is going to be morphing quite a bit. Whisper is directly a transformer model. It just is. The main thing is that it uses a different kind of input, so it can deal with audio, but it does, it creates a log-mel spectrogram, uses that image to do a convolution to then create inputs to the transformer. And then from that point forward, it's like standard vanilla encoder decoder transformer, which is fascinating. But that's a different architecture than GPT-4, because GPT-4 is decoder only. Whisper is encoder decoder. So there's a mismatch in that, so it probably won't do that. Image is a different thing though, right? I mean, one way to get a multimodal model is you have all these tokens. Here's are all your tokens for text. Okay. Tokens from this point forward are for images. Same token dictionary, but some is for text and some is for images. Learn. Now I'm training you on removing parts of an image. Now I'm training you on removing parts of a sentence. So you can do both training, and then it learns both concepts together, and it learns semantically what's going on in the images, because often you'll have images that are described by text, and that's how it gets both. And that's how GPT-4 was trained, even though they have not really made that image input as available right now. But in the video where one of the co-founders, co-presidents, co-CEOs did a presentation, he did a sketch on a piece of paper, a web page, took a picture of it, put it into GPT-4 and said, create a web page that does this. They did. I mean, so it takes image, coding, language all together. Audio, maybe a bit harder. Certainly you can't just roll whispering, certainly can't just roll Dall-E. And Jamie, you were asking me how this might work in an LMS, a learning management system. Is that the LMS that you're referring to? Or are you still here, Jamie? No, you're right. So Jamie, I'm assuming that you mean a LMS is a learning management system? Great.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I was just looking around for buttons. So yeah, so one of the things that I'm really involved with is designing online learning. And so the discussion about AI has been very robust within that community. But one of the things I'm the most excited about is how we might be able to use this in an LMS like Moodle or, and just how much work that's going to save.
No, I mean, right? I mean, think about, you saw the LaTeX example, right? So imagine, okay, now put this into a proper format, and so it can be directly ingested by, yeah. So here's an interesting thing. Was talking to a very large company which is developing a very large footprint in Tennessee, and they're interested in and of course they have an LMS, and they do that all the time, but they have a problem with trying to figure out what they need to teach versus what's happening operationally. So, and they have all these different documents, and they have knowledge, that people do on-the-job training. So they say, oh, and sometimes it's written down, oh, if you get behind in this on the line, it's because you don't understand this and you need more training in the placement of this, right? But the training that they do is just like set. It's just like, and it's not individualized. So the question is, can you, based on the descriptions, and it could just be text descriptions of what's happening on the line, and get feedback, because you can definitely generate text automatically from the line. This process is slowed down at this location, and here's the errors that we're seeing. But combine that with the descriptions to do a proactive or highly quickly reactive education plan for that person. So yeah. These problems are indicating lack of knowledge in this area. Therefore, on your queue is going to be, hey, review this before tomorrow. And then you have like an LMS, which is like perfectly personalized for what you need based on what you're doing at that moment.
Right. So this sort of makes me think of another question around this. So I'm more involved with leadership training and more the soft skills training.
Yes.
Which, in order to identify problems that somebody or challenges somebody might be having as a leader, for example, in order to access that, they would have to document it, which sometimes they do now. You can look at decision logs and those types of things. And I'm just sort of wondering if this might be a real sort of a reason that people might be concerned then about documenting things like decisions. Would there be a fear that, you know what I mean?
No, oh, absolutely. I mean, and especially because you have an AI watching. Good God,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how you do this is really important. But I wonder if you couldn't have simulations like skills and because think about it. So you have so you might have something on handling a difficult employee. I know this is like way too simple, but that's handling well, you can absolutely have a persona, set up a persona. You are a difficult employee,
Yeah.
and then and then your job is to figure out how to work with this person or how to come to an agreement with this. All of that can be captured and then could be actually reviewed using a different persona and guidance and policy, saying, okay, now, given this interaction between this leader and a simulated, person, what are, what needs work? So at least you could get a rich kind of feedback on that individual.
Yeah.
Even though it wouldn't be like a real world. At least then they'd know when the AI was watching,
Well, yeah, and I mean the role of learning and development is to provide that safe environment for people to practice those types of skills. I read an article on the weekend, or I watched something else, and they were talking about exactly that, how you could develop personas and scenarios with AI, which take so much time that they're not usually even done. Right? Like if we're being honest about it, right? We just kind of guess at this stuff because it takes way too long to do these really well. But to have AI being able to do your heavy lifting and just then going in and checking it, like
and running it too, right? Using the game design pattern. And so it's just okay. Now, so I have a nephew who has a foot injury, can't move, loves pro wrestling. So I gave him a prompt of, you are a friendly but argumentative and highly opinionated, commentator on professional wrestling. You like to take the contrary view, even though you're polite. Engage in conversation around, your favorite, wrestlers. And he had a ball, just arguing with this person that would always say, well, and then so you can imagine that in, like this is like the best role play plus one where you can capture all of that, and then using a policy base, we say, here are the principles that we think are most important for leadership. Which, what parts of this conversation, reveal, a strength or a lack. In these particular ones, be specific in the examples and, pull the examples as evidence of good practice or poor practice.
Right.
And then it's like a personalized, great, here's how you did.
Yeah. So exciting.
I even as we were just talking, I'm thinking, so we need to give training to our student project managers. And one of the tricky things with working with the data science team, with different skill levels is like, there's always a person who does not like to make commits and doesn't like they keep the code local on their machine, which you should never do, right? Because they don't want to put the code out there. It's not working yet. It's like having the conversation with that is a skill set. And you have undergraduates or the project managers who are just like, well, do it sometime. And really what they need to be saying, is, well, let's think about what's going to happen if you don't do this. No one else can see the code. It will never improve, but those scenarios, and we do role play with them, but it just occurred to me as I was talking to you, we don't have a whole lot of time to do the role play. Maybe what we do is we do a persona and we say, go play with this until you're comfortable calling a person who is a postdoc and you're an undergraduate and calling them on the carpet in a friendly way, so they do commit their code.
Yeah, I'm just, again, as you're talking, because so many of these conversations are new, I think there's just, all of this, all of these ideas just are being generated all over. But I'm thinking about social workers and counselors and
oh my God, yeah.
And I know I was looking at some stuff they were doing in VR that was using AI to an extent a couple of years ago. There was a couple of companies, they were doing some really, really good work when it came to setting up these scenarios, but they were
Mhm.
very limited in the number of
Yes.
scenarios they could produce. But
That's
if you
right.
do, and you don't need it in VR, you can do these things like, you
No.
know, it doesn't matter. Your
Right.
brain doesn't need that level of reality, right? But
Not really.
yeah, just like the ability to help people really hone their skills in a safe environment, because we don't have time in classrooms. We don't have time in training to do that. You get a little bit and that's it, right?
A little bit, but you know, even that little bit in the role playing in person is, I find, so helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? But imagine if you could just sort of pull that off whenever you want. So I've been wanting to learn Spanish, haven't, and so I'm doing Duolingo because Duolingo was one of the first people to use GPT-4, but my Spanish isn't strong enough yet, so where they offer me the GPT-4. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tomorrow night tonight say, okay, you are an excellent Spanish teacher for new speakers of Spanish, and we'll explain. I'm going to see how well it works and see if that progresses me faster, and I'm betting that it will, because I think that the real key is the persona, and then trying these different types of approaches, you know, such as the game, the flipped interaction. So sort of thinking at this high level, because otherwise you can get lost in all the different things you can do. But if you sort of keep it at this high level, then you can begin to sort of experiment with these.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Hey, are you going to be around for some of the sessions tomorrow, or is this going to be it for you?
No, I'm going to try. I just found out about this very late, so
okay,
I have to fit it into my work day. But
understandable. Well, great. Well, I'm glad that you made it, Jane.
Thanks.
Other questions or ideas from folks? And we're almost at the end of our time. Okay, well, I am going to go hop into and see what they're talking about in teaching and curriculum. And y'all are welcome to join me or stay here with Abby, whichever you'd like to do. Oh, you're very welcome, Paris. I'm so glad that you were able to join us, and hope you can be around for tomorrow. And keep in mind, we are around. We have our AI Fridays to 11 to 1. So if you ever want to drop by, 11 to 1, I'll be sending out emails about all of this to all the participants, but would love to talk to you some more. All right, I'm going to hop into teaching and curriculum.
Okay. I mean, if anyone has any last minute questions, I actually have to leave to go to another meeting, but feel free to stick around if you have any questions for Jesse or Shiro when they come back in, or hop into that last breakout room. But yeah. I need to hop off to another meeting.
Yes, I will be here and I'll broadcast to folks that will be ending in about 1 minute. I'm going to broadcast voice, it'll be like the voice of God.
Oh yeah.
Hey there, folks. We will be finishing up in just about 60 seconds. Mom, thank you very much for preparing that and for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
So Zach, Julia, and Liam, any final last minute questions before we close up?
None for me, but definitely some good information here.
Excellent. Very glad to hear it. Excellent.
One thing really broad, Jess, do you think we're gonna ever like run out of like high quality human generated data to train these models? Like, is there gonna be a limit to how good they can get? Or do you think that like we're just producing data at a rate that's gonna exceed that growth?
So we're going to have some problem with data poisoning, right? Where we're going to have like AI generated output in there. But at the same time, we're only using a fraction of what we're generating. Like we could do voice, Whisper is fantastic. So there's a lot of actual spoken and real interactions, think podcast, think, radio, think, all the different words spoken rather than written. And there's a lot more of that. So I think that there will always be forms of it. Plus, there's a lot of writing that people are just giving right now in the prompts. I like that, but, please do the following, that's input as well. So in some sense I think that we will always be generating some, but in some areas it'll, we will have a period where we're gonna have sort of poisoned data. But I don't think it's going to be permanent. But that's just my guess.
Cool, thanks.
All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'll pop in there and just let them know that we're if you're interested in rap lyrics over in teaching curriculum, they're actually trying to generate rap lyrics. So if you'd like to join in there, you can. I'm going to go ahead and go off screen. So we're actually officially finished, but they're not done with their rap lyrics. So I'm just going to leave this open.
Thanks, Jesse.
Very welcome.
All right, thanks again.
You're welcome, Zach.
All right, I think we will all head out, I think, maybe. All right, I think we will head out. I guess I'll just end the meeting. Thanks for coming, it was awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
And Julia, I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you for joining.